So corporations are making meaning out of data at this point by bringing together lots of different kinds of data to understand what's happening. I think there was a history of making sense of kind of silos of data. So people were looking at, like Walmart was looking at what people are buying in their stores to figure out what should go into which store, and that was pretty obvious. Now, for example, we're working with large banks in the United States that are being attacked. Those banks are being attacked by people trying to hack accounts, denial of service attacks. These are things you read about in the papers. What the banks are really concerned about is, one, protecting what's going on so that they look at things like their intrusion logs and these logs of attacks that are as they're happening. They're also looking at what's going on in the accounts inside the bank. They're also understanding what their employees are doing inside the bank. And they're bringing all that together to understand, like, what is the actual threat here? So when there's a hacker attack against a bank, is it because is it a bunch of kids that are trying to play around, or is it actually serious attempts to take over the bank, or to take over accounts here? Or is it actually internal threats inside the bank that are a problem? And these are really, really large data sets that are easy to look at, one each one. But when you actually bring it together, that's actually a really hard problem to answer, or a hard question to answer. So companies can take advantage of open data, first of all, by understanding the questions that they want to ask. So oftentimes there's this inclination to bring in lots of data and let's see if we can find something in it, which isn't really a particularly good way of trying to find answers to things. Once companies are very clear on what they want to know, then there's often sources of data around them that they could bring in. For example, if they want to know where their customers live, they could ask those questions. They could also work together with credit card companies or banks or others that actually hold that data to exchange data between each other to better understand their customers. The important part with open data, though, is that companies can only work with the data they have the right to work with. So there's this whole idea of like using data on Facebook or on Twitter, and doing that is actually a really complex legal framework, and so it's important to understand what companies have the right to use and what information is actually people's own. So when I look at what's happening and I'm thinking about what's next, I think it's pretty easy to say that the scale of data will keep growing. There'll be more and more data, more and more generated. I think there's a couple of things that will happen though. One, people will be much more aware of their own data. So people will understand that they are generating data and that data is valuable. And at this point, I don't think people have understood that, right? There's this trade-off where Facebook provides a fantastic service in exchange they sell advertising. And that's really people not understanding how valuable their data is. And I think people will become much more aggressive about asking to get paid for their data. So that's one piece. I think also what's coming is that companies will be working together much more to share data between each other. And this is going to open up lots of really, really interesting problems from an ethical and legal perspective. So as companies share data, more and more data between each other, who owns that data? Is it the consumer's data? Is it the company, the company that owns the data? Who is it? And I think that's a really interesting area for us to look at.